So a lot of feedback from my diver friends that we all have different systems for measuring visibility and forecasting visibility for our dives. So this is dive forecasting and underwater visibility talk, hoping to help you make more informed decisions and enjoy your time underwater. I first presented this talk at an Oahu Dive Crowd Deep Talk event, and a big mahalo to Aloha Scuba Company for hosting us and the dive community for coming out and supporting. Quick introduction, my name is Matthew Feely and I'm a master's in ocean engineering from University of Hawaii. Growing up in Hawaii, my wife and I spent a lot of time in the ocean, and we want other people to be able to enjoy the ocean as much as we have, and that includes the next generation. So some of that is just taking advantage of the resources for free available to you. And one thing I noticed is there's not a great forecasting, diving, planning app. So I'm representing Lu'u Live, which is a dive forecasting app. Still under construction, but you can check out my website at lu'ulive.com.
Okay, so why do we forecast? Have you ever lost your stuff in the water? Can that be blamed at least partially by conditions? We forecast because it starts with safety and we don't want to lose our stuff. It can be hard to enter or exit the water when it's rough. And if you're like me and I only have a few days a week where I can go diving, I want to make sure I'm making the most of my dive time and go with the best conditions possible.
So we're going to break this talk down into 4 sections: wind, waves, tide and current, and then visibility. So jumping right into wind. Wind is really a diver's enemy. We'll talk about the 2 different kinds of winds because there's not all the same for diving purposes, but it really starts with surface chop. It has it in the name, but wind has a tendency to tear up the surface in a way that's unfavorable for divers. However, we can position ourselves in places that are more sheltered from the wind. Meteorologists call this wind shadow, where wind is going over the trees, and the wind shadow is the area that's protected by the wind. That force is kind of broken up by the protection that the trees are providing. This is providing a calmer area of water for you to navigate that can be more comfortable. Wind can have a tendency to also drive currents, which can make your swimming, your entry and exit more challenging. It also reduces visibility. And when I mentioned the wind shadow in the figure above, that also pertains to Oahu's geography, which is the reason why the west side often has more pristine conditions. The trade winds blowing from the northeast are being broken up by the Kohala Mountains on central Oahu, which is pictured here in the slide, of the blue section, which is more calmer, lower wind speed conditions. I have the happy turtle in the top figure to show conditions that divers like under the wind shadow, and then the angry crab under the surface chop figure. And these visuals will be helpful throughout the talk to indicate what divers like and what we don't like. So one of my favorite tools for forecasting the wind before our dive is windy.com. I'll show you how to use that in 2 different ways now. The first is if we're planning our dive later in the week. So let's say in 2 or 3 days, we think we'll have a dive window. Where do we want to go? We're using Windy as a forecasting tool to see what the conditions will be in the future. And so I'm going into the tutorial now. So we're zooming into Oahu now. Notice there's a heat map, blue for calmer conditions, green for higher speeds of wind. Zooming into Electric Beach, this is one of my favorite dive sites. And we're gonna click on the dive site to see what the wind speed is right now. The wind speed's gonna be about 11 knots, which is pretty similar to 11 miles per hour, 12 miles per hour. And I'm pressing play to progress through the week and see how conditions evolve with time. And conditions really stay under 14 knots, which I think are favorable for us. Typical wind speeds in Hawaii can be between 15 to 20 knots. So this is averaging over Hawaii. This is better than average conditions, which is good. We like that. Now we're gonna use windy.com in a way that gives us observational data. And we would do that when we wanna go diving right now, because observations are always gonna be better than the forecast model, which are really just estimates and calculations of what we think the conditions will be. So what I'm doing now is I'm clicking into the settings to activate the wind vanes, and then looking at the nearby wind vane, which is the Kalealoa Airport. And this isn't exactly located at Electric Beach, but it's pretty close by, and it's also at sea level, so there's no additional effects that could be distorting the wind climate. And we see that the conditions are about 9 knots, 4 to 9 knots right now. So this is good. It's coming from the east. You can see the cardinal direction given there. I would say these are favorable conditions. So Windy provides free global weather data that's refreshed every 12 hours, but it's not optimized for Oahu. So we have to be cognizant of microclimates. So For example, I live in Kailua. My climate's going to be different than Waimanalo, which is the next Ahupua'a over. And for that reason, like, this model is not going to be able to pick up some of those nuances between ahupua'as right next to each other, even though in reality they're going to have different weather. And so some of the direct observations are going to help us to discern some of those differences. So as divers, we don't like wind, but if we have to have wind, we prefer offshore wind. So another thing we want to pay attention to when it comes to wind is the direction of the wind. Is it offshore or is it onshore? And bottom line here, offshore is good, onshore is bad. That's why I have the angry crab on the onshore wind and the happy turtle on the offshore wind. And the thing that we don't like about onshore wind is that the wind is enhancing the waves approaching the shore, and that's making it more choppy. It's tearing up the surface, it's kicking up the sediment, and it's making your visibility less, and it's making it rougher as a swim. Conversely, offshore is favorable for divers because the wind is negating and pacifying the winds, and it's smoothing the surface, and it's making it a more comfortable swim. So in the figure to the right, we have Waikiki, which is the geography is a southwest facing shore, which complements the northeastern trades, which is the typical climate. So that's why we traditionally have really consistent, pristine conditions in Waikiki. So on Oahu, we typically have trade winds, meaning the wind's about 15 to 20 miles per hour, and it's coming from the east-northeast direction. And this means we're gonna have nice conditions on the west side, Waikiki and Ala Moana and Pupukea. So I have those circled in green and a happy turtle on the figure to the left here. These are offshore climates. Sometimes we get Kona winds, and Kona winds are typically lower speeds, 5 to 10 miles per hour, coming from the southeast direction. So these are activating offshore conditions in other spots like Mokuleia, Pupukea again, but also Kaneohe Bay. Okay, now we're gonna do a deep dive into waves. What is the difference between surf and swell? A swell is a group of waves that travels across the ocean, created by energy blowing on the surface and pushing the back of the wave. Waves are actually created by storms really far away that eventually travel as groups to approach the Hawaiian Islands or any coastal site. The surf is the swell that arrives at the beach, where the shallow water forces the wave upward, compressing the energy into a taller, more violent wave. So in the figure to the right, I'm showing the waves crashing on the surface, and that's called breaking. So I have an angry crab there because if you see breaking waves, these are typically unfavorable for divers. On the left figure, you show a storm creating taller, longer period waves that are traveling to the northeast, and they're gonna hit Hawaii and Mexico and South America.
It's important to understand the difference between surf and swell because this is the vernacular that surfers are using and that's being used in surf reports. The surfing community is larger and has invested more in the forecasting and observation capabilities. So as divers, we can piggyback onto their efforts. As such, we need to learn their language. So among surfers and ocean engineers, there's 3 parameters that are used to describe waves. There's wave height, wave period, and wave direction. Wave height is the vertical distance from the trough and the crest to the wave, and wave period is the successive time between wave crest passing. The swell direction is the orientation of the waves. By using these parameters, we can determine how much wave energy there is in the ocean and what areas are going to be more sheltered than others. The more wave energy is in an area where we want to dive, we can expect more stirring up of the sediment in that area and less visibility. It's also going to be less comfortable for us to navigate as divers because more wave energy is going to drive a current sloshes us back and forth. To prove this to you, I'm showing a video now, artificial wave being sloshed back and forth between a wave flume, which is basically a laboratory for waves. There's an artificial beach at the bottom of the flume, which is being stirred up from the waves. You can see the grains being kicked up into the air and then falling back down, but before they can rest, another wave comes through and energizes it all again. All of these particles are making difficulty for you to see in the water. So we talked about the advantage that surfers have when it comes to observing surf conditions. As divers, we can capitalize on those reports. I've listed several different types of wave data that surfers depend on, starting with the most straightforward cams and ending with the most raw form of data, buoy observation. Surf cams are great. That's because they provide a direct observation in real time. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, a video's like 1,000 pictures. Unfortunately, we only have access to so many cams around the island. Most of them are clustered in the Waikiki, Ala Moana, or Pupukea area.
and that's because that's where the highest densities of surfers are. In the absence of cams, sometimes we can glean videos posted on social media. I've listed a few examples on the map, which is color-coded. I noticed that, for example, the Facebook group Oahu Dive Crowd frequently posts conditions at Electric Beach and Sharks Cove. That's the black circle there. There's also pages like Sandy Beach Surf Report, which is an Instagram page, and then the Facebook page Marine Corps Beach Safety. These pages can give you insight into conditions in less populated areas. Next, there are surf reports hosted by companies like Surf News Network, which is a personal favorite of mine. They will post narratives of surf conditions at the top surf spots every morning. They're labeled as red bubbles on the map. They also provide forecasts. And finally, you have wave buoys. We'll talk more about this later. Surf forecasters are converting raw data from these offshore buoys into narratives of what we will see surf-wise on the coast. Okay, so let's check out some of the cams. I'm on surfline.com and I want to check the cam at Diamond Head. So what do you see here? I see palm trees blowing, whitecaps, surfers and windsurfers. This is a terrible place to go diving, at least right now. Okay, now we're looking at the cam at Old Man's. It's right in front of the natatorium at Waikiki. The first thing I'm looking at is the windsock. It's the most obvious indication of wind. Note that the windsock's not fully erect, so there's a moderate wind present, and it's also going in the southwest direction. This is typical for the northeastern trades. I'm also looking at the different shades of blue on the ocean and the waves present. There's not too many waves, so this looks like a manageable dive site. I'm a confident swimmer. I'm also looking at the waves in the background. They look okay, a few white caps here and there. The different shades of blue tell me where the reef is, and because I'm familiar with this site, I can also guess what the tide is. Now let's switch to Waimea Bay. This water looks glassy and pristine. This is where I want to dive. I'm looking at things like the leaves, which are gently swaying in the wind, and the lack of wind is what I'm making note of. Hardly any white caps, no crashing waves against the islands in the background there. I see one diver out in the water. He seems to be having a good time. So this is where I want to be. Great. We've reviewed how to use surf cams to anticipate dive conditions. Now we want to figure out how to use surf reports, which are narratives, to understand what the dive conditions are going to be like. So the pictures here are meant to help you visualize what the wave heights in the surf report actually look like when you're out there in the ocean. Note that the wave heights here are described as wave faces in white text and the back of the wave height, or Hawaiian style, in black text. The top left figure with the happy turtle illustrates what 1 foot surf looks like. Wave heights ranging from 2 feet to 4 feet are illustrated in the figures outlined in yellow. If you're an experienced swimmer, you can still dive in these conditions, but use caution, and you're likely to find better conditions further from shore, away from the wave action. On the bottom row, wave heights ranging from 4 feet and above are outlined in red. I would strongly recommend avoid diving in areas with surf conditions that have wave face heights of 4 feet and above. You don't want to lose your stuff, so don't dive in these conditions. We covered wave heights, but surf reports also give us information about swell direction and wave period. This can help give us the full picture of what's going on around the whole island. In the figure to the right, I'm showing a south swell coming in at 162 degrees. A 0 degree swell is coming from the north, and 180 degrees is coming from the south. So 162 degrees is southeast-south direction. That means the southern coastline is going to get the most direct impact of this southern swell. The east and west coasts are also going to feel some swell wrap, which is going to be less direct because there's some energy loss in the swell having to wrap around. So I have a screenshot of Surf News Network, particularly the west coast section of Oahu. On the west shore of Oahu, on Saturday, August 2nd, there's a 15-second south swell. Remember, period is in reference to the organization and power of the wave. The larger the period, the more powerful the wave, and more organized. 15 seconds is fairly long, but typical for a south swell filling in. Then you have the primary swell wave heights, 1 to 2 feet plus Hawaiian. Below that, we have the secondary, because there can be more than 1 or 2 or 3 swells at any given surf or dive site. But for this 8-second swell coming in from the northeast, it's pretty flat. 0 Hawaiian, 0 wave face feet. Side offshore is just slightly less than ideal, but wind shouldn't be a huge factor here. Side offshores is just slightly worse than offshores, but not too bad. The forecast is presented in columns to the right, Sunday and so on. So to wrap it up, We have a south swell, which is why I have an angry crab, and in the south, that's going to be where the most wave energy is. And in the north, it's going to be sheltered from the south swell, so I have a happy turtle up north. On a day like today, I think the North Shore is going to have the best dive conditions. It's useful to keep a dive journal because when we go diving, then we can check the surf report and see what the surf was doing in that area. Then the next time we go diving in that area, we can check to see what the surf is doing at one of the most popular nearby spots. Great, so we've covered surf forecast websites. What kind of information can we get from wave buoys? Name 3 things. There's wave height, swell direction, and wave period. Now, if you're seeing this wave buoy data for the first time, it can be a bit intimidating, which is fine. But just know that if you're like me and occasionally skeptical of the forecast, you can cross-reference this data and come up with your own opinion. You can check the buoys before the forecast is even written because the buoys are collecting data 24/7, including in the middle of the night. The surf cams aren't even going to be able to give you good information at that point. The wave heights are going to give you a combined view of all the swell in that area. Moving down, then the swell direction is going to help you determine where the impact is going to be. Moving down to wave period, and notice this is color-coded here, the wave period is going to help you anticipate how powerful and organized the surf will be. The greater the wave period, the more organized and powerful that particular swell will be. A shorter period is going to bring more rapid, choppier, and sloppier waves. And if you've never seen a wave buoy before, here's one on the figure to the left. Pacayos manages a network of wave buoys across the Hawaiian Island chain, and the figure on the left shows you where they're located. They're not so close to shore that they're giving us information too late, but they're not so far off that they're picking up measurements that are irrelevant to the Hawaiian Islands. Now we're going to do a very brief history on tides and currents. Tides. It's the rise and fall of sea levels caused by gravitational forces from the sun and the moon and the rotation of the sun. So for our purposes, I usually check the tide last. Hawaii tides only vary plus or minus 2 feet. This is much less than, say, at New Zealand, where the tides can vary plus or minus 13 feet. So it's good to look at the tides because the water level can impact our entry and exit. Maybe there's a reef that we would prefer to avoid when entering the water. For example, maybe we would prefer to enter a certain dive site at high tide so that we can swim over a reef rather than awkwardly crawl across it on our feet. The nice thing about tides is they're very predictable because astronomers have figured out how the position of the moon and the sun and where you are on Earth will be impacted by the tide. You have access to tidal predictions going years out into the future. And one place you can get that is at Oahu, which is shown here. Okay, so I'm on Oahu here. I'm gonna check the tides at Waianae. I know that the tidal current is gonna be strongest during the steepest part of this curve, where it's rushing from 0.25 feet all the way up to 1.5 feet. So the current's going to be strongest right in the middle here when there's the steepest part of the curve. Because the water is kind of approaching a maximum here, current is going to be much more mild. Then it's going to speed up again as it falls dramatically and then kind of back off. This is called a slack tide here, where there's like a local maximum or local minimum, and then it's going to fall again. So one thing to note about tides is they're more noticeable near shore. The tide can have a big impact on the current, because as the water rises, it fills in towards the land, and as it falls, the current sucks water out offshore. Tides can definitely have an impact on visibility, but it's very complicated and site-specific. I think this deserves a deeper dive, so I'm not going to get into it now. Let's talk a little bit more about currents, because there's different kinds. We talked a little bit earlier about tidal currents, but there's also longshore currents, and these are driven more by waves. A longshore current can be created when the waves hit the beach at an angle and then pushes water down beach. If you're swimming in an area with longshore current, you'll probably notice that you're drifting down beach too. Then there's the more dangerous and probably well-known rip currents. Rip currents are generated by wave energy. They're usually located in between the breaker zones because all that water from the waves crashing on the beach has to go somewhere, so it's rushing back out to the ocean. That water rushing up the beach and then rushing back out in the same channel creates a rip current. They can be really dangerous if you don't recognize that you're in one or if you react in a panic. One of the worst things you can do is try to fight the rip current. You don't want to waste your precious stamina in the water by fighting the rip current because nature will always win. The best thing to do is to go with the current and then hope to be taken down shore. Ideally, you can spot a zone where there's calmer waves that can take you back to shore. If you can swim laterally towards that section, then let the waves do the work for you and bring you into shore. In general, we want to avoid waves when we're diving, and if you're doing this, you should be able to avoid most rip currents. Hopefully, you feel just a little bit more prepared if you find yourself in this situation. You can sometimes spot rip currents from the shore. If you can, you probably shouldn't go out. Sometimes they look like discolored area where debris is moving offshore. It looks kind of like this figure on the top. Okay, now we're gonna do a really brief summary on rainfall and runoff. The thing to know about rainfall as divers is we don't like it. Heavy rainfall pushes sediment from Mauka to Makai. That sediment will negatively impact our visibility underwater. And the sediment that we find in the water from rain, the silt, the mud, and all that organic matter, we call that runoff. Runoff, bad. It can be a source of pollution as well. We're not just worried about sediment, we're worried about wastewater discharge, agricultural fertilizer, feces from feral animals. That's not stuff we want to be swimming in, and you can get seriously ill. So if we can't see our dive site from the convenience of our house, how do we avoid rain? Well, we can use windy.com, which is one of many weather forecasting websites, to look at the predicted rainfall. And if we want to look at historical reports, because we're planning on going right now, we can look at the National Weather Service. And if you're really concerned, you can check the Hawaii State Department of Health for brownwater advisories. This isn't a fail-safe though, because they don't test everywhere and the results aren't immediate. But if you want to know when it's safe to get in the water again after a heavy rainfall, you can refer to this website to see when they've cleared the brownwater advisories. The Department of Health recommends that you wait at least 3 days after heavy rainfall before getting back in the water. We've covered so much. Now let's wrap it all up. If you're planning your dive later in the week, first check the wind on windy.com. We want to look for spots with an average wind speed of less than 15 knots. Then let's check the surf. Surf News Network is one of my favorites. We want to look for a site that has wave face heights of less than 2 feet. Finally, we'll check the rain. Did it rain in that area? We want to dive at a site that had less than 0.1 inches of rain in the last 24 hours. And as your target dive date approaches, check these forecasts regularly leading up until the date. Forecasts always change. Okay, let's say we want to go diving right now. If we're diving in an area that has coverage, then we'll want to check the surf cams, because that's going to give us the biggest picture overall. You can get that at surfline.com. We're looking for calm, clear water and clear skies. If there isn't a cam in the area, you can still go to Surf News Network and see what the surf is doing in that general area. And finally, so we know what the wind is doing, we should look at some of the nearby observation towers. Now we're all set. Now you know how to plan your dive. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your interest in my style of planning diving. I would love to learn how you plan your dives in the comments below. I'm actually working on an app called Lu'u Live to help you plan your dives. If this is of interest to you, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Mahalo and aloha.